start this off with a quick land acknowledgement. Lex and I are actually in New Mexico on colonized Apache territory. Normally we live in Vermont, but we've been quarantining here. So we're on Apache territory, but normally we would be in Abenaki land. If you're in Vermont, you're Abenaki or Pennacook, part of the Wabanaki Confederacy that's extends through the entirety of Vermont and all the way north up to Nova Scotia. And we say these things, we do land acknowledgements, not to just like do it for the sake of doing it, but to kind of frame this conversation in a bit of like the history of, where we're all coming from as people, and like wanting to talk about ancestors and wanting to open the conversation to talk, not to feel guilt or shame, but to just like recognize history. And I think particularly for me, like thinking about land acknowledgements and like trying to build a world that looks a lot better than the one we're living in right now is important to think about, the way that we got here. And that was, through the process of settler colonialism and through the creation of the concept of land ownership and the imposing it on people without their consent. So we're going to be talking a lot today about different types of power and about consent, and whether or not we consent to live in this world that is rooted in violence and colonialism and white supremacy. And what can we do if we say, you know what, I don't consent to living in this kind of a world. Like I don't consent to living in a world that exploits people for profit and where a bunch of people make decisions that affect everyone else. So part of doing this training and sharing this space with you all and opening with a land acknowledgement is just to say, better worlds have existed before now. The world that we live in right now comes from a long history of genocide, and that we don't need to feel guilty or ashamed because of that, but rather just to be critical and called to action to figure out, okay, what do we do with the world that we've inherited, and how can we exploit the ways that we benefit from this world? So that being said, this training, we're hoping it can be as much of a conversation as possible. I'm excited to see a small group of people and to get to know you all and to encourage you all to challenge yourselves, to speak up if you have questions, if you have concerns. We want to like really have this be interactive and guided and shaped by where you're at and where you want to take this. And also with that in mind, like there's a couple of ways that white supremacy culture shows up in our society, even if it's not explicitly in race-based terms. So like white supremacy culture tells us we shouldn't speak unless we're perfect. That's also part of the patriarchy. Like women are told, failure is failing, and men are told like failure is not attempting. So keeping that in mind, keeping your gender identity in mind, and pushing yourself to feel okay making mistakes, because I make them all the time. I'm like a walking mistake. So we can all make mistakes together, and that's okay. And that's like welcomed in this space because perfection is the enemy of good. And like white supremacy culture teaches us that we should be, waiting until we're perfect to take action. So we're all here to like make a space to mess up together and to journey together towards truth, which is maybe do we have any Unitarians on this call? Well, we'll figure that out. But that's where I'm coming from, is just like trying to be with people and figure things out together and to like honor good intentions and values, but also to be critical of how we're showing up. So happy and excited to be with all of you and doing this, and really excited to have Lex co-training. And if people want to introduce themselves, that would be awesome. We can do a quick go around, name, pronouns, faith, community, if you want to share that, and one word of something that brings you purpose or meaning. So I guess I can start. I'm Kira, I use she and they pronouns. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and I find meaning in community building.
Okay. I'm Lex, I use they, them pronouns. And I was just having this conversation in my head about what I would say my faith community is, and would be recovering Mormon, I guess, but have gone to a bunch of beautiful UU meetings, which have been wonderful in my, anyways. And then one word that would be my source of purpose would be liberation. And then should we call on people?
Yeah, can we do Sally and then Judith? And then Judith, you can pick two more people.
I'm Sally, I'm a UCC pastor. And the one word that would describe what matters to me, especially in the context of today's world, is I have a Black husband and 3 Black children, is family. Oh, and she and her.
Thank you. Thank you. Judith, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm Judy, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a member of Mojave Zedek Synagogue, and I'm somebody who doesn't like to narrow things down to one thing, but a word, not the word, but a word for me is curiosity. And 2 more people, Lila and Martha.
I'm Lila. I use she and her. I'm a member of Mojave Zedek. And I think the word would be accountability. And I guess Martha.
Yeah, I actually go by Marty, although it doesn't really matter. I'm a member of Christ Episcopal Church in Montpelier. And the word I picked was cooperation.
Okay, and then Betsy and Jill.
I'm Betsy. I use she, her. I'm a recent Unitarian, I don't know, participant, and other Protestant backgrounds, and weakly in my life, let's say. I mean, not very strong. The first word that popped in my head when you said one word, and it was based because you were reminding us so much about the heritage of the people who were here first, was nature. I think if I were to step back and study the whole thing better, and because I come from a history of perfectionism, I would be trying to come up with the best word. So I don't think that represents completely, but that's what came into my head. Let's see, Tyrell, please. Oh, I think you did pick a second person. I apologize. I'm going against.
That's okay.
No, that's okay. Yeah, if you're ready, Tyrell, that's great.
Okay, hi, I'm Terry, he, him, and I participate in the United Church of Christ. My word, a growing word for me, is action.
And then Jill, if you're ready.
I'm going to pass.
Perfect.
Sweet. Thanks, everyone. It's great to meet you. And I think
Yeah.
we're going to kick it off with just a couple. We're going to kind of lather some terminology at you, not necessarily to say that there's one definition for each of these words, but just for me, definitions are a grounding point in kind of figuring out how to use the concepts that I know in order to be as effective as possible. So we're going to kind of throw some definitions out and then hopefully get you all to kind of play with these concepts and figure out how they might apply to your life and where you're at.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll start on that. So in Kira's explanation of when we're talking about colonization and the uses of power and overtaking things, a lot of the time in social justice movements, we see power as something that can be really oppressive and really harmful, potentially really violent when used in awful ways. And so there's this person, Starhawk, who did different definitions of power: power over, power within, and power together. So I'm going to kind of go through those, and then we can talk about the different ones or examples of them. So generally, power, just in general, is the ability to get something done, right? You plug something into to a power source, and that is what's used to make something work. Power over, however, is an oppressive type of power, right? You have power over something, it's potentially like suffocating that thing. It's used that power is kind of maybe used without consent for the people that it's being by the enforcer, right? So the person that has power is maybe using that power without consent of the people that have to endure the effects of that power. Does somebody want to give an example of what power over might look like? And you can just say it out loud if you want to. It's okay if we don't. That's so fine.
There's a lot of
examples.
like everything is power over. Like when, I guess, does anybody want to share like a recent time when a decision that somebody or another group of people made affected you and you didn't get to participate in that decision?
I think the idea of power over is just so, as you said, I could come up with 100 examples in about 30 seconds, just based on my life experience. So to consolidate that into one is just impossible for me. I worked in the healthcare system for 30 years. That's a great example of power over.
Wow. Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, I totally feel that because I am currently a healthcare worker, and it is like power over within being an employee, power over within giving care sometimes too.
And your position in that system, what you do is, I did a whole paper on it in seminary. So that's why I don't even want to go there, because I'm going to get on my soapbox, and so I'm going to shut up. But
no, I definitely.
That's one example.
You are all invited.
Family
to step on your
systems is
soapboxes.
another one.
Family systems?
Yeah, just the hierarchy within families, children, parents over children, men over women.
Yeah.
I mean, that's our society is totally rooted in power over others.
Yeah. Thanks.
And that ultimately is what's wrong. It needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are perfect examples. I really appreciate you sharing.
I think like George Floyd's murder is another one that maybe is some of the events that brought us all here today, right? Like from the Hate U Give book, and talking about when police murder people, and that I can't think of an example of when murder would not be power over, because you're taking someone else's life. So that's definitely.
My kids live in the outside of Chicago, and there have not had a grocery store. Everything was closed down in March. They have no pharmacies, they have no grocery stores, they have no banks. That's power over people. University of Chicago has taken over all the property, knocked down my daughter's nonprofit building, so they couldn't be there anymore, so they could have the land.
That's awful.
Well, it's the reality of the world, and that's why I hesitated to say anything, because I could go on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's landlords are power over. Eminent domain is power over. Really, anytime a decision is made where the people who are harmed or even affected by the decision don't get to have a say or like have an equal voice in that decision. Even like the nonprofit industrial complex, with like thinking about, charities that you think they're doing the right thing or are trying to do the right thing or have good intentions, but don't prioritize the impact of the people that they are serving. Like, can be like, well, this is how you solve your problems and I'll solve them for you. Like, that's still power over, and it can still be harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I do think that it's not always intentional. And that's our DNA in this country is rooted in power over. So it's everywhere.
Yeah. Like it's so normalized that is the functioning that we're so unaware of when that happens, especially to us or when we're doing it to other people. And I think even just having this conversation and drawing attention to that is really important, and being aware of that. I think it's like overwhelming to think about how much power over like happens to us and that we inflict on other people too. So being so unaware of it.
I mean, when you think about the book, if we're coming together based on the book, The Hate U Give, white privilege, the biases we all carry. all of us in this Zoom thing have power simply because of the color of our skin, or most of us, I mean, the attendees, and we don't even recognize it. That's the danger in it. It's not that it's intentional. It's not that it's malicious. I mean, those are easy to call out. It's the unintentional, just who we are, that
Yeah.
is what is so disruptive and so disturbing.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So with that, thinking about overwhelmingly, like that is the power over is something that is really consuming and really oppressive and violent. But there's also power within, which is like your personal strength, like what gets you up in the morning, when the world is so full of like people that perpetuate the idea of power over even ourselves. So there's power within, and that's like this feeling like when you're resilient, when you just like make it, when you survive. And then power together is what movements are made of, which is like teamwork, community building. Kira gave a really good example of this, which is just like a relay race. Like there's 4 people using their talents together to complete, using their power to complete a relay. Like that's power together, using everybody's strength. So with those definitions in mind, does anybody have questions about the definitions or anything? Okay. So with those definitions in mind about power, sorry. Yeah, Betsy, sorry.
I just realized, I don't think it's probably relevant to where we're going to go with it, but another form of power that is talked about is higher power, that many people have in one way or another. So just throwing that into the mix.
Yeah. I like to think of higher power as a source of power within. If that makes sense, like that, and maybe this is the Unitarian in me, like I am perpetually, like I find like religious meaning in like seeing other people find religious meaning in whatever ways that means to them. So like, if like your higher power like moves in you to like be compassionate and like to, whatever it moves you to do, like I see that as like such an incredible and sacred thing, and that like potentially wherever our like inner strength comes from, whether that's our family, whether that's God, whether that's anything like that, that higher power like becomes inner power in each of us in different ways. I don't know if I'm trying too hard to wrap this all together, but I'm really glad that you said that, especially in this space. Like, and just want to say like that higher power could be like a totally relevant part of this conversation, and is certainly a source of strength and power within.
For sharing that. Thank you, Betsy, for bringing that up. Okay, so with those ideas of power in mind and those definitions of power,
Didn't you also mention power under?
Say more. Yeah. If
You said power over, power under, power with, power within.
Are you bringing up power under, or because we had the power over, power within, and then power together, right?
which is sometimes called power with, and could be called power under.
I don't know, maybe I heard power under, but I think it just strikes me that if there's an over, there's gotta be an under, and sort of like the way that I was thinking of it. I guess I heard it because I wanted it to be there, but the way that I was thinking of is that power under is a sort of power with that nobody is noticing yet, or that people aren't aware that's there. So like you saw it in like with all the the native peoples that were coming out, and that turned Arizona blue. Like nobody expected all the nobody expected this groundswell really of power from otherwise disenfranchised indigenous people, or the groundswell of youth, of what they call the youth vote, like the 18 to 29-year-old. And I think there's also something really strong about harnessing like strength, but not showing your strength until you're ready, and maybe even you don't know the way that it's going to show. But there is something really I've seen power bubble up from places where I didn't expect it. And so I guess that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think that's why we make this as participatory as possible, because you all have these like brilliant insights that we didn't write power under in the training outline, but really, yeah, power under does seem like it's the resistance to power over that happens, when people are being oppressed, are facing oppression, and they are, being resilient and coming together and getting out the vote where no vote was voted before, and that, that's like the resistance. Or maybe we are power under right now, like white supremacy is everywhere, racism is everywhere. What do we do? Like we're fighting an uphill battle, but we're still here.
In the course of a job, or even in the course
Thank
of
you.
like doing a general workout.
Yeah, that was
Can
really
I-
beautiful. And I
Can
deeply
I ask
appreciate you
if
sharing.
somebody has a TV on or something to mute it, because I can't hear what people are saying because of the background conversation.
Oh, perfect. There we go. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, that was a wonderful addition to and definition to things that we talked about. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, sorry. So with those definitions in mind, we're going to talk about goals, strategy, and tactics using power. There's some more definitions I have for you. Sorry. So goal. What do you want to accomplish? And this question should be asked constantly, like with any goal that you have, with whatever you're doing. It's like we were thinking about buying a car, and it's like the whole car spectrum is open to us. Like, what's the goal of the car? What are we going to use it for? And then we would just like try to narrow it down, and then we would ask, okay, what's the goal of this specific car?
And Lex was like, oh, I want to get a truck. And I'm like, well, what's the goal? Like, what is the goal?
Right. What's the goal?
It's not just like, oh, I want to do this thing.
Right. It's like, it's a really good ask when you're setting an intention for what you're trying to do, or what you're going to, accomplish. So anyway, that's your goal. Strategy. How are you going to accomplish the goal? What are some strategies that might help string some goals together or accomplish multiple goals? And then your tactics. What action steps can you take on to further your strategy? So this is kind of like tools in a toolbox that you're using to help fulfill a strategy, which will then accomplish the goal. So it's kind of like a tiered, you have your goal, you think about the strategy of how you're going to accomplish that, and then your tactics take a look at those like actual action plans that you're going to be doing. So I have an example for you. You want me to use this example?
Yeah.
Okay. So the goal is to not get COVID. Okay. So what are some action plan, or what is the strategy for not getting COVID? Do we want to kind of like popcorn out strategies for not getting COVID?
And think like strategy is a bit bigger picture than a tactic. Like hand washing is a tactic because it's very, but strategy is kind of like the theme of your tactics almost.
Well, like avoid germs. I mean,
Yeah.
Like minimize your exposure to germs. It might be a strategy. And then what might be tactics to avoid the germs?
washing your hands, wearing a mask, staying 6 feet away.
Yeah,
Awesome.
exactly.
Perfect. That's like exactly what we wrote. Strategies like avoid unnecessary exposure, maintain sustainable routines and habits, right? And then tactics, Zoom calls with friends, spending as much time socially distanced outside as possible, good hand washing and mask wearing. That was perfect. So does anybody have questions about those definitions? I struggle a lot sometimes separating tactics from strategy because sometimes they can get like a little mingly when you're thinking about it. Do you want to, do you have something else to clarify with it
No, that
about
was
that?
amazing.
Okay, cool. So then when we're talking about, so we have all those things, right? And the tactics are really the kind of the core of accomplishing a goal, right? They're like the ants. Oh,
The
building
ants,
blocks,
yeah.
the ants of like building this functioning society, right? Okay, so so there's multiple different kinds of tactics that you can use, and it's really important to just appreciate all of the different type of tactics that can be used and things that people are really, really good at.
Like
and
voting is a tactic.
Voting,
Voting
okay.
Yeah. For social change, or donating to charity, or putting a protest on.
Right. I'm spacing, I'm so sorry. Okay. So looking at and thinking about diversity of tactics, you want to think about like the importance of quantifiable qualitative benefits. Meaning that like anything that's being done, as long as it's not harmful to anybody else, is helpful, right? Helpful to power within potentially, and then that also helps power together. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So there, and this is something I struggle with too, which is why I'm reading it and looking at it and being like, oh, what am I going to say about how I'm obsessed with this? But we, in white supremacy culture, and
You personally.
transparency's sake, really struggle with like not being able to recognize quantifiable evidence that something's working or something is going well. And so if I know that I have this route that I want to take, and I know because I've done it that it's the fastest way there, I don't want to take like a back road. I don't want to go, another way or engage in that because I know quantifiably that this is the way that I know works. And it's really hard for me, and it takes time to work on it to recognize that like back roads really do have their like beauty to them. There's not people speeding down the road. You're not kind of thoughtlessly thinking as you're going down that freeway or highway. And there's curves and beautiful scenery that aren't so different. So anyway, it's I think we as a culture are really obsessed with like the fastest, best way to do it, and that there's really kind of no other tactic other than that that's worth something. So anyway, was there anything you wanted to add to that too? I just told a lot about myself right there.
Can I just use your analogy? Because I live on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, and the traffic through here, we've lived here almost 30 years, and it's quadrupled, and it is the fastest traffic I have ever seen. They don't care about speed limits. They don't care about, so it's not an either or.
Yeah.
That's I'm really glad you said that. Like something I have only just started reading about, and like it's been so helpful to be able to when you like think that something is wrong but you can't put your finger on why, like it feels harmful to you. There's like white supremacy culture has all of these ways that it shows up in our society, and either or thinking is definitely a tenet of white supremacy culture, that like you're either good or you're bad. There's no nuance. And like the other one is what Lex was talking about, like quantifiable benefits are the only things we should be working for. That's a tenet of white supremacy culture, when really like I don't know, like maybe this is, so like the thing that my mom told me when I was a kid that like I think about probably more than anything else she's ever told me is just that like every person and every moment and every interaction has something that you can learn from it or from that person. So like nobody is ever a waste of my time. Like I can always learn something from somebody. And I think that the benefits to interactions with different people might not always be quantifiable. There might not always be a number I could put on it, or like I might not always be able to see in my conscious brain how I'm learning or growing from this person, but that doesn't mean I should be like, you know, stingy with my time or say like this person's not worth it. I think like the society that we live in, like, I mean, I just think about like, so I'll out myself. I'm a lawyer. Law school was awful because it's very like GPA this, like your class rank is your defining feature. Like you are constantly judged by everything from what you got on the LSAT to how much money you get in scholarship to like how much weight you stress gain because law school is horrible. And all of those things are really harmful ways of measuring somebody's intelligence or health or value. So trying to get away as much as possible from like only doing things if we can see a direct numerical benefit. And so this concept of diversity of tactics means like that we should be, you know, definitely trying to be in communication with somebody who's got a different tactic or strategy, and being like, hey, like, I know that, like, so this was the example I used earlier when we were talking about this. Like, if Lex is like, I'm gonna try to like have a better self-care routine, which involves watching a horror movie every night before I fall asleep. And I'm such a wimp. Like I got through 20 minutes of Nightmare on Elm Street and I started screaming and we had to stop watching it. So if Lex's tactic for them to have better self-care is harmful to me, then like we can talk about it. But that doesn't mean that I'm like, well, that's a bad strategy because TV is bad for you. It's kind of like not using power over with regards to other people's tactics, but rather saying, you know, let's use power together and figure out how your tactic can, you know, keep doing what you want it to do without harming me, and recognizing that we might not always be able to see the benefits to things. I hate scary movies. Fun fact.
And I did, in fact, the whole month of October, watch a scary movie every night. So this was real. I like that you, and appreciate that you brought that up, because the whole time you were talking about that, I was thinking about like interactions with people, especially with the diversity of tactics, like and appreciating everybody's interaction with you and how they move in the world as like transactional and transformational relationships, which Kira brought into my life and my vocab knowledge and whatever, about how we are so taught that like everything that we do with somebody else is potentially transactional, right? If I do something for you, then they should do it for me. And there's like, and really it's about like the transformation of the experience or the conversation, that nothing's owed, nothing's like wanted. It's just, it's transformational for everyone. And now I'm thinking about Octavia Butler wrote this book, The Parable of the Sower, and these two lines really like resonate with me. All that you touch, you change, and then all that you change changes you. And like I get chills thinking about that, because it's just like so true, and it resonates so deeply with me. And there was a whole conversation about how everybody likes the all that you touch, you change part, because there's like some semblance of like control that you're giving to other people's lives, and this lack of recognition that like that in fact changes you, you know, all that you do, you change, all that you change changes you, which I think is really beautiful. So anyway, should we end on that part for that section?
I'll send around a link. I read a zine about this that was probably the most important thing for my personal learning experience that I've read all year, which was just a list of all of these white supremacy culture characteristics, and that was one of them, transformational versus transactional. And just like thinking about how when you give a gift, that act of giving changes you without ever needing to get payment back for that thing. We don't have a PowerPoint that we're working on, but we could share notes. I could copy my notes in the chat. I'll work on sharing notes with you all, or at least get you something written to look at afterwards, if in case this is a lot to take in. So thinking about different types of tactics and diversity of tactics, and wanting to make sure that I'm not saying do these tactics and not those tactics, but rather to like offer up some of my favorite tactics that I think are the most effective, as like a kind of lawyer organizer hybrid, that I do a lot of work in like racial and immigration and environmental justice, mostly in Vermont and a bit in New Hampshire. And so I like to kind of talk through tools with people, and these are things that maybe you've seen other people do, maybe you've used some of these tools yourself, maybe you've seen them work or not work in different contexts, but recognizing that context plays a huge role in whether or not a tactic will be the good choice for that strategy. I want to go over a couple of them. The first one is protest, like a protest, which probably a lot of us have been to a protest. And I like to think of a protest as having its kind of facial purpose, that like we tell people this is what a protest does, like, and then it's actual inquantifiable benefits, which I think are infinitely more important. And the facial purpose of a protest that I think is actually less important is you're begging somebody who has power over you to please use their power better. So I can think of the last protest I went to was outside the Department of Corrections in Springfield, Vermont. And I think I had a sign that said "Free them all" on it. And I was holding the sign in front of the DOC and saying, you know, like, let these people out, like they're dying of COVID, and they're being put in solitary confinement as a, like, for their own good protective measure, when the UN has actually found that that's like a form of torture, to be stuck inside your own head 24/7. So I have a sign, it says "Free them all," and I'm begging the DOC to let these people out. And the DOC has power over me because they dictate the terms of that situation. So the DOC is not gonna listen to me holding a sign. Like, people with power over me benefit from maintaining my oppression. And it's, you know, it's probably true for all of us. Like when our stabilized oppression is like the fabric of society, and the people at the top with power over us benefit from us staying oppressed, a protest is not generally going to directly accomplish the goal. Like Phil Scott, if I stand outside his office and I say, pass the health, like, you know, give me healthcare, like unveto that bill, like, you know, do things that are good for me, and I hold that sign in front, he's not going to be like, oh, you know, I should actually give back that money that privatized prison corporations gave me for my campaign trail, and I'll start being better for you. Like, he's not going to do that. But the intangible, inquantifiable benefits of a protest are actually, I think, pretty cool. Like, you know, bringing people together, like building solidarity with people who you have, you know, shared goals with. Like if we all have a protest and we all get together, we get used to working together, to building power together, we might gain visibility. So the power holders are not always swayed by a protest, but the community can use that as a networking opportunity, as a visibility opportunity, as a kind of part of their campaign narrative. So that's protest.
Can I
Yes.
I'm thinking about it when we protest. For a lot of us, when you talk about like the prison system, a lot of us, there's no power over us because we're not part of the system. But we have power simply by showing up to protest the power over those whose voices have been silenced because they're in prison or whatever the circumstance is. So that's part of what I think is so important, is for people who have power need to recognize their power in that particular circumstance, to come up, show up, and speak out, because they're more, like you said, it's probably not going to make it, but they're going to hear you a heck of a lot more than they're going to hear the prisoner in the cell.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't recognize the power they have simply by their voice and their position in society.
Yeah. Well, that is an excellent segue into the next, like, tactic that I like to talk about. This one's my favorite. So protest is you're appealing to someone else's power. Direct action is where you use your own power. And I think what you're saying is like crucial, Sally, like figuring out what our power is and how we can most effectively use it. A coworker of mine says it's like finding finding the pressure point to make the system squeal, recognizing that I overall have way less power than, you know, the system or the patriarchy or the white supremacist, you know, industrial machine that we live in. Finding your voice, like what's the thing that you can do that's effective even in the face of a system that is like seemingly insurmountable. And maybe that's not just me by myself, maybe that's me with my affinity group or my community. So direct action is like using your power within and together with your community to directly stop something bad that's coming at you. Like, I don't know if people remember in the early 2010s, the Vermont gas systems pipeline that was coming through Vermont, it was supposed to go under Lake Champlain, but it did not. They ended up pulling out of that part of it, but it did go through like Moncton and down to Middlebury. And there was a lot of folks who said, okay, well, we don't want this pipeline here, so we're going to take a bike lock and lock her next to a tractor, and we're going to say, nope, like you can't build this pipeline here. So that's direct action, because you are saying, I don't need to ask you to stop. I will use my power to lock down here to force you to stop. So that's one way to do it. Or positive direct action. I don't know, has anybody like seen these mutual aid networks spring up since COVID? That's a positive direct action, because it's like I want my community to have food. I want my community to feel safe and supported. And rather than, begging Phil Scott to unveto the healthcare bill, I will just see who's got skills and who's got extra resources and try to set up a network with my community to match needs with surplus resources. So that's like, there's infinite direct action examples. And the third,
I have a question though.
Yeah.
Because in this conversation, we're talking about protests not necessarily being for our benefit, but for speaking out on behalf of others, where in your explanation of direct action is more about me. This, the gas line through Moncton, I grew up in that, people showed up because it impacted them. What my concern is how do we get people to show up when it doesn't directly impact them, but it impacts another human being or another part of our culture?
Yeah, I think that's a good clarification, because you could protest somebody else's oppression, or you could protest your own oppression, and you could do direct action, like, the pipeline that's in your backyard. Or I know a bunch of people who, I think they were even like, some of them were homeowners, but they decided to go to the courthouses and lock the doors shut so that nobody could get in, so that people couldn't get evicted. This was recently, I think it was in Kentucky, because of, the pandemic, and like people are out of work and not able to stay in their houses. So then on eviction day, they locked the doors shut. And you could be locking them shut so that you don't get evicted, or you could be doing it so that your neighbor who's like short on rent. So definitely thinking like, how do we, I think that like, that's such an important question too, because like, I don't want to act from a place of trying to be a savior, but I also don't want to just like be totally selfish. So that maybe also comes into like recognizing that white supremacy is like an acutely dangerous thing for Black people, for people of color. But right, like white supremacy also harms me as a white person, because of this like white supremacy culture that's bad just for all of us. So like, how do I approach it from a place of like not trying to be a savior, but also like centering and prioritizing the people who are most harmed by a bad thing?
Well, and I guess one of the things that comes up to me in this is one of the things we talked about in our book group with The Hate U Give, is how as white people in the state of Vermont to go out and protest is not very dangerous. Most of us don't think we're taking the lives into our, but if we were to do actual direct action and show up in a place where the cops are going to kill a Black person, that's much more sacrificial in so many ways. And so I think it's really important to dissect how much we are willing to give of ourselves to actually make those changes versus just making us feel good that we're trying to do something. That's so important to me.
Yeah, that is so important. Like, I don't want to do things just so I can say I did it. You're smiling because
yeah.
Like, I don't want to be like, oh, I went to a protest, I pat myself on the back, I go home. I want to think, what level of risk am I
do that?
comfortable? Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of that is the difference between protest and direct action. Direct action requires a threat to self in some way, where protest, at least in this context, doesn't necessarily mean that.
Lila?
So I wanted to tell a story that I heard recently from someone who had been walking with some friends, And as they were walking, they saw a car stop, they saw police, they saw that the driver was a person of color, and they stopped. And they stopped to decide, to look and witness to see what was happening. They realized that it was actually a car accident. So it was not what they feared it would be. But what they did is they decided to stop and witness, and then depending on what they witnessed, they would act accordingly. So I think part of this is also not, it's sort of looking at what are examples that can be used in terms of, and I know the word has been bystander, and I know some people are starting to use the word upstander, someone who stands up to do something. So, those are really, I think, good thoughts to think about. How do we do that? And how do we do that in a way that is supportive, or in a way that is organized with others, where we're acting in concert, but to look at some of the specifics. So I hope that you're going to get into some specifics.
Yes, definitely. And thank you for that story. I think that's how do we do this? And I think consent is really the key. There's been times when I've been talking to law enforcement and had somebody else be like, oh, a female talking to a cop, you must be uncomfortable. I'll step in and talk for you. And, it's actually I'm trying to, extend my comfort zone and get better at this. So please don't. And then there are definitely times when I'm so glad that this person is here with me in this interaction because I'm nervous. And how do you know? And it's really just about getting consent and checking in, but that's definitely can be a life or death difference. If you are just being with somebody and sharing space with them in a moment where maybe you have white privilege and maybe they don't, and maybe you can lend that privilege there. We're going to talk at the end of this about de-escalation quickly and how to kind of exploit your emotional labor or white privilege if you have it in those kinds of situations. And just to get into a couple more examples too, so protest, asking somebody to please use their power over you better. Direct action is your power directly within. And that might be, so for Cop Watch in Burlington is a great example of direct action, because they're we want police to be more accountable. We want people to feel safer when they're getting arrested. So they're not let's form a civilian oversight commission. They're no, let's train people to go out and videotape police when they interact with homeless people. So that's an example of direct action, because they're building those skills to do that themselves, rather than a protest, which has also happened in Burlington, and which again, diversity of tactics, I'm not saying it wasn't effective, but they had protests in Burlington too, where people got together over shared outrage of police brutality. Then there's direct action, which is groups like Cop Watch, or Food Not Bombs is a great example of direct action. You don't have to get arrested or even to put yourself in danger to use your power to directly create change. Food Not Bombs is not an arrestable thing. They're just let's give food to people who need it. And then the third one that people often conflate with direct action, but I think is important to recognize they can sometimes be the same thing, but they're not always, is civil disobedience. And that is performative law breaking. So or you can have cultural disobedience where you break a cultural norm. So if I say, at the sit-ins in the civil rights movement was both direct action, because they wanted a multiracial eating space, so they made one, and it was civil disobedience because they were performatively breaking segregation laws to show that they're wrong. So you can have, some things that are just direct action, like if you glue the locks at the courthouse so nobody can get evicted that day, or things that are just civil disobedience, where, you're, trespassing at a coal plant to show that, property rights should not be more important than human rights, something like that. And the last tactic that I think is part of each of these individual things, and also is a foundational, going back to what gives me purpose, this is one of those things, is organizing. And organizing is a tactic where you build power, you build capacity in the movement, where you reach out to people who maybe don't feel empowered, and you give them like escalated things to do to get them involved. And this is like really kind of what I do all day. Like I have a law degree, but I don't really use it. Like I don't need it to do this. It's helpful to be like, I'm a lawyer, but really organizing is the vast majority of what I do. And it's like, you know, figuring out what people care about, like figuring out, like we were talking about this. So Lex's brother-in-law is a Republican, and like not very political though, kind of like doesn't know what to do about it. And so I like was talking to him and was kind of like, what pisses you off? And I realized it was taxes. And then I was like, well, here's a David Graeber podcast about how like money is not spent efficiently. Like we don't allocate resources in this country based on compassion or logic. We allocate resources based on like giving resources to whoever has the money to advocate for their right to have resources, if that makes sense. And so figuring out what somebody is interested in, giving them one thing to do that's concrete and tangible that they can then do and come back for more if they're interested. Like this is like a lot of this comes from Ella Baker, who is a behind the scenes organizer in the civil rights movement, a Black woman who died in like the 80s, but was around for the whole civil rights movement and was very like behind the scenes kind of tapping people, mobilizing them, getting them to care about something, giving them a concrete, doable thing, and then saying, come back for more. And that's like how movements build, is by reaching out to people saying, here's one thing you can do, and come back to me and I'll give you a bigger ask, and maybe ask you to ask other people. It's like a pyramid scheme for collective liberation. If that's like an okay analogy to make. So thinking about that, and we gave you a lot of vocab, and we would love to just like hear from you all things that like, you think would be a good use of your power, or like, are there groups in your area that are organizing? Like, has it been effective? What's something you like, if you could wave a magic wand and like do something, like what would it be? What would you find meaning and power in doing, whether that's a goal, like what your goals are, or how you would get there, or anything? Like, what would it look like for you to kind of come up with a strategy to accomplish a goal that's in line with your values? It could be by yourself, it could be with your faith community, it could be with your family.
I've spent the past 3 years serving at the church I serve, and we finally had a breakthrough, and working on white privilege it's a small group of us, but it's been quite phenomenal. The book groups and stuff we've done since fall, and the things people have learned in recognizing their privilege, and in the context of their Christianity and the impact of Christianity in not so good ways that they had no clue, which kind of surprises me. But I think helping people learn the reality, the history that is not theirs as white people, I think that's paramount to what faith organizations need to be doing, is helping people, because as you said earlier, we're all harmed by it. We may think we have the privilege, and it's all misnomers, because we're all harmed by it. So
yeah, like let me see tell me if I'm phrasing this wrong, but a goal being like to plug into anti-racist movements and to combat racism, and a strategy that sounds like it's working really well for you is educating white people about racism and white supremacy, and a tactic is book groups.
Yeah, and not even going so far to the supremacy and racism, but to me, it's the white privilege. Mm-hmm. Recognizing that, because if once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I've over the past close to 2 decades, I am recognizing how my being able to share what I've learned with my children growing up in Vermont, I didn't know till they were adults what their experiences were. And here is a white woman. I would have done anything. I would have, they're my blood and flesh, and I didn't know it.
Yeah.
So to be able to say, if I couldn't see it, but now I see it, and I can tell you, I can show you in the supermarkets the things that are discriminatory, that are rooted in white privilege and white supremacy. I feel like that all of us here need to be aware of those things, because it's very simple. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then you can share that. So I think it's also about self-education and being willing to being open to what is wrong. Because once you see it, you can't, I don't think any of us could not speak to it.
Yeah. There's a lot of like, whiteness is the default in society. It's normal to be white, like that's what society is through a white lens. So like, that's so true that people don't see it because we are ingrained by white supremacy culture not to see our privilege, because we're taught to think that everyone has it, and if you don't, it's your fault, rather than like we've been given it by white supremacy culture. I have been helping this group in Lebanon, New Hampshire, with this ordinance that prohibits police from calling ICE and Border Patrol and being like, hey, there's somebody here who doesn't speak English, I bet they're undocumented, come pick them up, which we've seen happen all over the northern part of Vermont. So they're trying to pass this ordinance, and there's a task force of community members who are immigration and racial justice activists who put this report together. And the report was like, nationwide, there are data-based statistics saying that government officials, particularly police officers, are racist and like present an acute, lethal danger to immigrants, to Black people, to people of color. So that was in this report. And then the city manager made a point to go back and clarify and say, just to be clear, that was a position of the task force report. That is not an official position of the town. And like denied, went out of his way to deny systemic racism on the record. And just to hear, like, I don't know, like if anybody else has ever heard people say, well, like, I don't think there's racism in Vermont. Like, who says that? Like, I say that if I don't experience racism, which I don't. Like, I never had any idea how bad police brutality was until I was in the car with 3 Black people getting pulled over by a state trooper, and like was witnessing the aggression that like came from that person towards my friends in the car. And I had never, like, I just didn't know it was that bad because I didn't personally experience it, because my white privilege, when I get pulled over, cops are like, oh, like, that's fine. But in this instance, like, my friend was learning how to drive, and she drove this far over the center line and got a $240 ticket and a misdemeanor for like endangering people.
Wow. Well, and it's even more simple than that. One of my greatest things, that it's funny because the same year my kids shared their experiences with me, when I was in seminary and I took a course called Justice Matters. And one of the things I had to do is pay attention to all the marketing. And if you go into any grocery store that I've been in Vermont, if you go down the aisle that has spaghetti and lasagna and pasta sauces on one side, on the other side are the tortillas, there's the black beans, there's the rice, on the signs up above, it says pasta, it says sauces, tomato sauces. On the other side, it says Mexican and Asian.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
It should say Italian and Mexican if they're being accurate.
Right, like, exactly. Yeah, if you're gonna use Asian and Mexican, then who does not identify pasta and is Italian?
Yeah.
And I just wish people, I mean, I have put in more cards in the local Hannaford's in Essex saying you need to change these signs. And it's things like that are so simple. And my daughter, when she was 12 years old, said, Mom, when you go into a store to buy nude pantyhose, what color are you getting?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the things that we as white people should be. It's very basic, it's non-threatening, but it's real. It's real. It's telling people who do not have that color skin, they do not matter, or are not of that descent, they do not matter.
Right. This like brings up too, like, and maybe this is something we all kind of mull over on our own time, but like the role of like you know, who's like an accomplice in this situation. It sounds like, you know, you have white privilege and you are like also as a family member to Black people, like, you know, have that intimate understanding and have the ability to like get consent from, you know, your family to see how they would best like to be supported in this situation. And like, that's amazing. And that gives you this like unique ability to exploit your white privilege, like, you know, to further the movement. And then also like, how do we, you know, figure out the ways that our own oppression is tied into like, you know, normative society, and how do we exploit that? And like, really when you're thinking of like, what's your goal, what's your strategy, what's your tactic, like creativity is your best friend in this situation. And that was, you all had amazing words in our initial go round, but like something that is, you know, obviously like there's no direct comparison, and nor should there be, between queerness and race, like that Black people face an oppression that is unlike anything else, and, you know, can intersect with heteronormativity and the oppression of queer people. But not to make a comparison between the two, but just to say, like, I know for myself, like sometimes a way to like kind of fight back is to just like out of the blue ask straight people like, so when did you know? And just like, you know, like there, because that's what you get asked all the time when you're gay, is like, when did you know you were gay? Like you just like, and that those kind of microaggressions, to just flip them, or like, you know, give somebody like the wrong skin color, give a white person like you know, a black band-aid, or like different things like that, like kind of ways to play with it, and maybe ways to make that a statement, maybe ways to amplify that message. Obviously, like if we are white people organizing against racism, we should be, you know, first finding like affected community, finding Black and POC leaders to say like plug into those movements, and listening to especially like calls on social media that are like written out. So we're not trying to be like, let me call my one Black friend and ask that person how I can support them if that's not labor they want to do for me, but figuring out what's being asked, and being creative about ways to subvert, because you're right, it's everywhere. Like this like world that we're facing is like flooding us with propaganda, and how do we subvert that in ways that are like done with the consent, and not like putting it on people of color to tell us how to end their oppression, but rather looking for existing resources that are already out there that are telling us how to do this. So I want to maybe transition. Do you think we're ready?
Yeah. Mhm.
So the hardest thing for tactics and diversity of tactics is to figure out how to be supportive of tactics, and to like be critical of them in ways they might be harmful, while also not being like elitist about them. There's an exercise, if people feel like comfortable doing a little bit of like, you can stay in your seat, but like facial expressions are moving just to kind of engage a bit. This is called the violence spectrogram, and usually we do it in person, but we're on Zoom. The modified Zoom version is to just use like body poses and facial expressions. So we're going to say a couple things one by one, and then we're going to ask you to make a face or a pose, and the reason you should be making that pose is based on how violent you think the thing is that we're saying. So like if I say eating meat, like make a face or a pose as to how violent you think eating meat is. And then we'll ask anybody who's willing to share. So ready, set, go. I want to see what Tyrell is saying. Tyrell, can we call on you to explain? Or Terry, sorry.
Oh, you're muted.
You are muted.
Yeah, I pushed my space bar, but it didn't temporarily unmute. So
Why did you make that face?
Well, I'm vegetarian, and the longer I'm a vegetarian, about 30 years, the more it just seems like I don't understand meat for myself, and I try not to talk about it too much with people who eat meat. But so yeah, it just seems more and more that it seems violence inherent in meat. I don't want to be too. I mean, I don't want to be too sharp about it, but you know, personally, it's a strong feeling.
Yeah. I mean, as a Unitarian, and also like recognizing diversity of tactics, like, you know, I think this would be a safe space if you want to like be more open about it. Like, we will no vegetarian shaming on this Zoom call. Like, is it the taking of a life? Like, is it the way that the animals are raised? Like, could I ask?
All of the above, yeah. It's the whole system. It's what it does to the environment. It's what too much meat, I think, would do to my own body. And it's definitely the sense of getting my nutrition and life by taking other creatures' lives just has increasingly been less sensical and more, I guess, grosser to me as I get older. So it didn't really start out that way. It started out as a conscious intellectual choice. Okay, the animals are not being cared for the way that I think would be helpful for the world. And I think, and also at that time, there was some concern about the environment, but we hadn't yet really begun to address climate change. And, but at this point, it just is all of the above. And particularly, I work in places where there's food being prepared for groups, and it just, I look at dead animals, or birds, chickens, those kinds of things, and just think about how can people, I don't understand anymore how that works for people.
Yeah.
But of course, that's not a conversation, I don't then go out into the dining room and say, how can you eat that? I mean, that's not something I'm going to do. But when people are ready to talk about it, I'm willing to kind of share, things that they might want to think about along that journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was a vegetarian for like 12 years, for the same reasons it sounds like as you're, just like the thought, the environmental impact, right? The way the animals are treated. And then I stopped being a vegetarian because I was like, found myself being given like food with meat in it, and then I would throw it away, and then I would buy new food. And then I had this whole like, like there's the drawdowns, 100 best things to stop climate change. And one of them is grass-fed beef. But then I realized I wasn't actually eating grass-fed beef. So and then it spiraled into this whole like, and now I'm kind of like, well, actually I'm like, when it comes down to it, just grossed out by like the way that, and it's like, I think maybe I feel similarly as you. I don't want to impose my choice on others, but like, it does make me feel better to eat more vegetables and less. So then but anyway, I guess the point of this exercise, and thank you, Terry, for letting us use you as an example, is that like, there's so much nuance to everything, and it is context dependent, but that like people like are doing what they can, and that we shouldn't be disparaging vegetarians for eating vegetables any more than like, sometimes it's just not affordable or practicable for people to be eating meat when the big picture is the system like that, being a vegetarian is amazing. Also, eating meat while you're working to abolish the industrial agriculture system sometimes is a necessary thing. Like there's nuance to that, I guess.
Yep.
Hopefully
You're just being sweet to me because I do eat meat. No, you're not being sweet
I'm
to
not
me.
being sweet.
I know.
You want to do the next one?
Sure. Thank you for sharing, Terry. I really appreciate that.
Hopefully you don't feel vegetarian shamed. I think.
I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
I think that's awesome. If like, yeah.
I really appreciate, as somebody who does eat meat, like appreciated your like dear feelings about that, and like really made me like question my own like consumption of meat, to be completely honest. So I like really do appreciate you sharing that with me and everybody else on this call. So thank you. Okay, so next prompt.
If your faces are ready.
If your face is ready.
Start with a blank face.
Okay.
Ready?
Punching someone.
Punching someone.
Is it violent? We should ask Judy.
Yeah.
Can we call on you? I'm cold calling. This is not law school. I should be asking for consent. Would you mind sharing, Judy?
I'd be glad to share it. It's that just seems like punching someone is violent. It's invading. It's hurting somebody. It's invading their space. It's it's a definition. It's physical violence. Yeah.
What is your definition of violence?
I don't have a definition of violence. It's a great question. And I love the question, actually. I think it's really embedded in your original
discussion that started out about defining power. And so I'm somebody who, like, I'm the kind of person, like, 3 days from now, I'll be thinking about this and I'll say, okay, I've got a definition of violence. I'm not like a on the spot thinker, but I know that it will be linked to that sense of how people use power. Let me just say that.
I love that. And thank you for sharing so much. And we actually had a conversation and talking about what we wanted this like violence spectrogram to like bring discussion about. And I was like, well, do we want to, we're sharing definitions of power. We're kind of trying to like have a unified consciousness about what these definitions of power are. And as we're talking about them, and I was like, are we gonna try and have like a defined definition of violence that we are like trying to get everybody to understand? And Kira was like, no, because everybody's is different, and that should be come to well, you could, I'm speaking for you now. You should say what you said, because it was really great. So no, go ahead.
I think as long as like with all these definitions, like I'm just sharing the way that I think of things, and like Lex is sharing the way they think of things. And violence, like some people have a broad definition of violence, but then certain situations where violence is morally acceptable. And then some people say violence is only what is morally unacceptable and define things as non-violent. So like, punching somebody, I guess we could ask first, did anybody make a face that was maybe like made room for the thought that punching somebody could be nonviolent? Or could anybody think of a situation when punching someone is nonviolent? Betsy, I see you nodding a bit.
My face was negative, I immediately pictured misuse of power and somebody being injured and all of that violence. But as we're doing this discussion, I'm thinking, the one instance that came into mind, of course, is if somebody were about to strike a child or somebody else I viewed as defensive, I, of course, would always try other tactics. I never have hit anybody. I wouldn't even know how, but, I would try other tactics first, of course, to keep somebody safe. But, there is, certain times of defense.
Yeah. Like if somebody was getting beat up, like I would punch the person beating them up. And I guess like not needing to all be on the same definition, like it's okay if that still feels violent to you. Like self-defense can still feel violent to you. For me, self-defense or defense of others does not fit in my definition of violence, but like that's okay if it does for you. And like just recognizing that maybe sometimes people like use physical aggression as a way of like that might be morally justified. And this is like, again, we're bringing up a bunch of nuance and kind of just like putting it all out here to say there's no right answers, but like it's really important to think critically about the moral, like, is it okay to punch somebody? And like, yeah, if they're beating up a kid, like for sure. I guess is where I'm coming from on
For
that.
you.
But is it violent? Like TBD, and like it's okay to say yes or no to that.
Well, I think that's the important thing about these prompts in this exercise is like kind of just recognizing that everything is really nuanced, and there isn't some grandiose like overarching thing that like it falls in this category, and that is that, kind of like we were talking about the either or earlier, and that is like a tenet of white supremacy. It is that or it's not that. And that the point of this exercise is to just like think critically and nuanced about every situation and cause and effect and all of those types of things with each of these prompts. So
it just brings up to me the question of, yes, to me, punching somebody is violent. So the question then is violence ever okay?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And this is also too, like, I'm going to out myself again. I'm gay. No, just kidding. I mean, I am, but I'm a abolitionist. So I believe in the, like transforming the world eventually into one where prisons and police are not needed, by recognizing that the root cause of violence is not, is like systemic, and it's part of like this world that we live in that exploits people for profit, that like is rooted in ecocide, in genocide, in the like exploiting Black people for labor and profit and culture. So like thinking about where does harm come from, where does it start? And like I think about, so like we live in Windsor, and like we live on the street that everybody's like, oh, don't go to Jarvis Street. And one of our neighbors got arrested recently because she was dealing drugs, and like her grandkids who she was taking care of got put in foster care. Like she had been trying to pull herself together, had been trying to go like get treatment for her own use, and then getting incarcerated just like ripped the family apart, and like was one of those like, now she's like super stressed and like isn't in a position anymore where she can try to get clean, because she's like, it like putting someone in jail in her situation, it just shifted the violence and the harm and the like untreated disease of addiction that she had, and put it in a different situation, and like traumatized her children. Like the cops like did a no-knock warrant in the middle of the night, and they come running in the house with guns and like pulled the kids out onto the street at gunpoint. And just like thinking about how awful that experience was for her, and thinking about violence and like where that started, and that started long before the cops ever showed up. And like that, just like thinking about systemic violence and how most of it comes from like inequality and poverty and racism and oppression and like trauma that's like not being treated, and is being met with punishment rather than love and care and compassion. And it just cycles like perpetuated violence, like Melissa said in the chat. So like to me, this exercise is really about like getting people to explore the nuance of where the violence comes from. On that note, do we want to do the next one?
Yeah.
Are people ready for another one?
Okay. All right, here we go. We should maybe just do one more.
Okay.
Do you want to do the next one that we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Get ready.
Normal face.
Oh, you're doing it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Let's do calling the police. What's your face for that? Calling the police. Let's ask Melissa if she will explain.
So being married to a Palestinian man who, and having had the police knock on our door late at night because he was considered a suspicious person in a gas station, makes me really think and question, when do I call the police and why do I call the police? Like if my kids are missing and I can't find them anywhere, I'm going to call the police because I'm going to be like, I need you to come out and help me search for my kids. But, like I was actually downtown with a leader, downtown Barrie. I live in Barrie, for those of you who don't know. And we were having a socially distanced conversation. And we had a woman come up to us very panicked and very frightened and asked us to call the police for her because and I knew that the woman has some mental issues because of some of the work that I've done. And she felt like she was going to be harmed by this other couple that was walking by. And I just looked at her and I said, well, would you mind if we'll just hang out here with you? And if they come over and they start bothering you and you don't feel safe, then we'll consider calling the police. But could we just wait on that? And I think sometimes if we always jump to the conclusion of like, I don't feel safe, I need the police. Well, there's other ways that we can feel safe. And so that's why I hesitate. Like I really question when I call the police and why I call the police. And, but it's just been because my experiences as I have aged and as my relationships have changed really inform my thinking about how safe the police actually are. And, and then that's not, it's around race, but it's also around class. And, if you're already perceived as a burden to the police department, then they don't always take you seriously. So like this woman, I'm pretty sure if I had called the police and they had heard the name of this woman, they would have taken their sweet time getting there, even if she was in dire need, because they think of her as a joke because of her status in society. And so that's why I just kind of question, like, maybe we need to rethink the way that we view public safety.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing. And I think that kind of goes back to what Lila was saying earlier. Like, what do we do? And like, how can we be bystanders or upstanders? And part of that is like what you're saying is like being there for people and being like, hey, are you scared? Like, can I hang out with you? Like, and let's see if things get better. Like, how can I, and the stronger that our relationships are with our neighbors, like the more likely if like, I'm like blasting music too late, that they'll just knock on my door and say like, hey, you're annoying, like stop, and they'll feel comfortable. And this goes back to the like unquantifiable benefits, and community building is one of those like unquantifiable benefits. Like I think Lex gets a little frustrated because my staff, I have a part-time paid job, and then I do National Lawyers Guild stuff for fun on the other side of my time. But my paid job, we are from all over the country. Half of them I've never met in real life. And we have a lot of like seemingly useless staff calls where we just like talk about our Myers-Briggs signs or like make really not funny jokes. And like it's annoying for Lex.
Totally.
Like,
It's just, yeah. Awful.
But this unquantifiable benefit of community building, even if like it doesn't seem like it's directly accomplishing our goals, allows me to have better relationships with people. So I can be like, hey, actually, that thing that you said was really problematic, or like, hey, that idea that you had is like really bad. And because we've done this bonding, it doesn't come across as bad as it would if I was just like, hey, person I just met, like, you're awful. Your ideas are ineffective. So the same goes to like community building, and like, I mean, that's a facetious example, but like the better we know our neighbors, the better we can like show up for each other. The less likely it is that we're going to be like, this person is suspicious, which often has like racially loaded or class loaded like as a term. So that's just like, I think a really good example, Melissa, of, yeah, like there is often a lot of problems in calling the cops, and like, recognizing that, yeah, if like there's an active shooter, I would probably call the cops at this point, like, but also that active shooters come from like mental health issues that are unaddressed, and we don't have enough resources to like take care of each other to like prevent people from getting to that position. And how do we do the kind of both and of being like, ideally in a world without active shooters, we wouldn't need to call the cops, but maybe we do now, but probably not for most things. And how do we invest in relationship building upstream, so that we're not, calling the cops on people that we think are suspicious.
Support from Efficiency Vermont.
Do we want to do a quick nitty gritty de-escalation training, and then, or?
I think that we want to maybe honor folks' time, and so maybe do a closing, and we can maybe put a plug. I know Kira has said that she would be willing to do trainings in the future for us, so maybe that would be something that we could tie into another training at some point, if that's okay.
Yeah, that would be totally fine. I do a lot of trainings. I love trainings. That's like, yeah. So if we wanted to, like, I'll just send a link to Melissa for like future dates of like legal self-defense trainings is the one I do a lot. That's like what the law is about probable cause and consent to a search and right to remain silent and all those kinds of things. It's really helpful for when you are trying to be an upstander or a bystander in situations where you see police harassing people of color, poor people, homeless people. So that's something we could do later. You do that too.
Yeah.
And de-escalation can be a whole, like, there's all these kinds of trainings that like skills you can build basically, but we were kind of hoping that this would be more of a like getting people thinking about power and about social change and about ways to maybe plug in. So we could use the last 3 minutes to do a quick go round, and also recognizing that people might think of questions like in a couple days. And so Lex and I can drop our emails in the chat. Is that okay?
Yeah, because I was actually going to share too, not that it's just for Sally or and it's absolutely for anybody else, but and I'm not going to take up too much of this time, but there's like a lot of readings, and I don't want to get into like the like reading journals and stuff, and making like the education of yourself the most important thing, and then not doing action with it, because I think like the institutionalization of like knowledge-based kind of rhetoric or journalism can sometimes be problematic, but I do have a lot of like wonderful journal articles about like the language of race, and specifically like our like the way that we use language and that kind of thing. So I was going to share that, but yeah, absolutely. If you want to put the emails in there, and there's a lot of wonderful things anyway that I was going to say that if people wanted to get information about. Do you want to start the go round? What's our checkout? Just like how we're feeling, I think is what we were kind of wanting to end this with. So if you want to, we would love to hear just like how you're feeling after this whole conversation. It was a lot of definitions, a lot of like feelings, a lot of like wonderful, at least for me, and I'm sure you, like feedback from y'all and like wonderful like comments you all had about what we were talking about. So
a quick sentence of, and I guess I'll start it off. I always leave these things feeling like it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, that was it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, trying to model
right, yeah.
a quick
Good,
feedback.
quick feedback.
Yes.
I'm feeling really uplifted. Do we want to do the same order we did? Well, I don't remember what that was. So Lila. Oh, no.
I'm feeling that there's we scratched the surface, but there's a lot more to talk about and think about. And I appreciate everybody's comments.
Judy?
I'm feeling glad to be here and have been here.
Sally?
I simply appreciate that people show up for this stuff.
Terry?
I'm feeling like a lot of good food for thought. And I'm actually have just started the book, The Hate U Give, and I'll be reading through that. Doing a lot of thinking, which is why the word action is kind of important to me, because I'm really interested in how this is going to translate. I'm looking forward to an email that has resources and contacts for you. And I'm grateful for your time and everybody's time. And I'm grateful to have been a part.
Awesome. Martha?
Let's see.
Marty. Oh, you muted yourself.
Okay. Well, I really appreciated it. Appreciated everything that people said. And like several people have said, I'm aware of how much more I need to learn or how much more there is to do. I've done a lot of reading. I've been in two book groups reading, anti-racism book groups, and really got, I think, a lot of perspective, but I see that there's a whole lot more to do.
Yeah. Awesome. Betsy?
I'm feeling confused. And confused about what I'm looking for from these different groups and what I need and want to, I don't know, expand or reduce or increase my awareness of my racism and privilege that's still there, I'm sure. And I feel kind of confused about what this was going to cover, but maybe it was also just me being busy and not rereading it. But by the same token, as everybody else said, I'm just glad to have been here with curious people seeking. And even though the nuggets don't quite hang together for me yet, I know I'm going away with some nuggets and even some specific comments about, more ways that, I guess racism is, present in labeling and many other things. And a little more food for thought about my continued choice to eat meat too.
And Melissa.
Concern to me, so thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Melissa.
I'm looking forward to being fully present at the next training. I feel like my appetite was whetted by what we shared and talked about and what I heard, but I didn't feel fully present because of some extenuating circumstances tonight. So yeah, but thank you.
Well, thank you all so much.
And
for-
congratulations to America for your husband's citizenship.
Yeah.
Almost there. My husband had his interview at up in St. Albans today for the civics test and the English test, and he passed. So now we're just waiting for when he will take his oath of allegiance, I think is what they're calling it now. So super excited about that. Huge stress weight lifted off of our shoulders.
Well, I'm happy for all
Congratulations.
of you, but I'm
Actually, I had
happy
to
for
take
all
those
of us.
tests.
One more good person, you know, it's awesome. So thank you. Thank him for doing it.
Yeah, it was time. I don't like keeping track of dates and how many times I mean, it's been easier with COVID, but trying to keep track of the number of times that he goes up to see family in Canada is just exhausting.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing.
Mhm.
We'll